ought to know a lot more about the lawsuit than I do. I'm fairly good at ad-libbing, but I thought I'd better ask Ian when To Kill a Mockingbird became legal to teach in high schools and public schools in the state of Florida. And the answer is 1987, which I find just simply amazing, because I was teaching in Ohio. I was teaching actually To Kill a Mockingbird, among other works, in the early 70s in Mentor, Ohio. So when my family and I moved to Florida in 1978, I was teaching in a private school, St. Brendan's, but I had no idea at the time, since it was not on the syllabus, and I was following the standard syllabus. But they had problems with Mark Twain, which was also on the Blueberry Patch list. And I'm actually dumbfounded that it took that long. I thought maybe 70s, but 1987. I'm afraid I don't.
I grew up in Virginia. Mm-hmm. I grew up in Virginia, mm-hmm. And they did not teach this book in the 70s.
It's amazing.
I mean, I graduated in 79.
Yeah.
And actually, I had seen the movie, but I didn't know anything about the book until I was in my 20s. Yeah. They did not teach it, talk about it, or anything. My experience, too. Yeah.
That is amazing. Well, suffice, let me just draw a line under this rumor thing by saying something that came through public radio about Truman Capote, and then I'll get to the lawsuits, and Harper Lee, and the notion of Capote having anything at all to do with the composition of To Kill a Mockingbird. This is fairly recent. March 3rd. New evidence may end decades, and I just printed this from the internet, but it's a transcript of public radio, and I'm not going to belabor it, but I just one paragraph from this retired professor of history from Auburn in Alabama. They have the letters of Truman Capote, and there's one from him that is now being made public. It's interesting, in his lifetime, Capote didn't deny it vociferously enough. You know, kind of kept things floating, which is disturbing in a way. Why didn't he come out and say, I had nothing at all to do with, you know, they were good friends. You'd think that he would quash the rumor then and there, but what was left in a letter, and now it has been made public. It was, as I understand it, Mr. Block says here, given to a museum from a cousin of Mr. Capote. What does it say, and how does it help quash this rumor? Flint, quote, essentially it says that a year before the novel was published, in July of 1960, that Capote had seen the novel, had read much of the book and liked it very much, and commented that she had great talent. And nowhere in the letter does he claim any involvement whatsoever in the book. So I have no idea. It's because she wrote just one book, and it was incredibly good. And then I guess they took turns, and the crests of fame and all of that. And of course, Truman Capote wallowed and luxuriated in parties and fame and breakfast at Tiffany's, the whole persona. He allowed the myth to kind of blossom.
He was very jealous, apparently,
yes.
of her because she won the Pulitzer Prize. And there again, in that video that I watched, it's her sister Alice saying that Harper Lee never left the friendship, but he gradually left the friendship because of his being consumed with the jealousy of her awards and fortune.
Just consumed. And I read the Capote book, In Cold Blood and Breakfast at Tiffany's and To Kill a Mockingbird. I consider To Kill a Mockingbird a finer piece of literature, but that's just my opinion. Getting to the lawsuit, let me just stop by saying I know nothing about it. Bang! It's your ears, buddy. Was it the American Civil Liberties Union launched a lawsuit and against those states, Florida and Texas, and won, and it got into the mainstream back in the 80s. Would that be even close to speculation? Okay, I don't want to invent things because I do that plenty, but something like this, I better leave the research to you when you get home, and we could all Google it.
I wondered the same thing myself, but didn't.
Okay, no problem. In May of 2013, May of 2013, Lee had filed a lawsuit in the United States District Court to regain copyright to Kill a Mockingbird, seeking an unspecified damages and all of that kind of stuff. And this is, you have to understand, the period of time when a publishing house were to buy something, the publishing house would grant a buyer a purchase. Sometimes publishing houses at that point in time, and remember we're talking about the 1950s, the agent would be the beneficiary, and the ownership, so the ownership would revert to the beneficiary, which was the agent, which only left residuals to the writer. Okay, so a little bit of history on the law of publishing. So, as you know, and I had stated earlier that her agent had passed, and her estate went on to her son-in-law. And what it was is because she was so modest and unassuming, she felt that she was duped into writing it away. So, because she had, the literary agent received notification when his mother had died in 2007. And so everything was given to the son-in-law, who was the heir apparent to this woman's estate. And a piece of her estate was To Kill a Mockingbird. And when the writer would receive these residuals that would sale of the book, and the literary agent would receive residuals. So they divided up. And she felt that was unfair. So, and she was aging, so she felt, because of her age, because of the fact that she was very young and inexperienced, she felt that she could sue for the rights to her own book. Now, you have to understand, publishing law has changed since 1950. If you want to write a book, knock yourself out, it's all yours. If you want to write a book and have it published through an enormous agency, knock yourself out, it's all yours, but they're going to take a cut. It's like music. So, So in September of September of 2013, they settled the lawsuit, and she regained a portion of her residuals. So right now, but still, that book is in limbo. So every time they reprint it, it's problematic. Now that's a brand new reprinting that you have. Yeah. Okay. So in February 2014, she also settles the lawsuit against Monroe County, which basically took the name and the title of her book and they promoted it as souvenirs without her. She had 2 lawsuits, and that you cannot, if you're part of a 501c3, you cannot promote a book unless it's published by your 501c3. This is real technical stuff, but it's interesting nonetheless, at least to me. So you cannot I can't take Peter's book, Martha and I can't take Peter's book and say, this is what we're selling. This is our book. But if we published Peter's book, then we would be good. Well, that's what happened with Monroe County, is they kept on reprinting without consent. And she won an undisclosed amount of money. And when they say undisclosed, there was a court officer that said it was in the tens of millions. And again, that's all speculation. We don't know. So, and it was with souvenirs. I mean, they would put this.
T-shirts, handbags, hats.
They would take this cover and put it on hats and shirts and mugs and God knows what else, and previous covers of all of the other editions, and then print it with the label of Historical Museum of Monroe County. Obviously a naughty thing to do. You know that as a writer. So, needless to say, she settled in both cases. But she was concerned about that whole souvenir thing because it would ruin her brand. So, okay, what are we talking about now? Fast forward to 2015. Anybody, what happened in 2015? Anybody know?
The miraculous discovery of a
Miraculous discovery of a new book. So,
How does that happen? How do you miraculously find a book?
well, it's like how they miraculously found Renoirs and Van Goghs and Jackson Pollocks. It was miraculous. Now, I'm not a magic believer.
Barnaby's not here.
Yeah, Barnaby's not here. And I love Barnaby. But anyways, so I'm going to read you the official version. And tell me if it gets too boring. I'll try to fun it up a little bit.
You sure Truman Capote didn't write that book?
Huh?
I said, are you sure Truman Capote didn't write that book?
We're pretty positive. We're pretty positive. According to Lee's lawyer, Tanya Carter, following an initial meeting to appraise Lee's assets in 2011, she re-examined Lee's safe deposit box in 2014 and found a manuscript for Go Set a Watchman. After contacting Lee and reading the manuscript, she passed it on to Lee's new agent, Andrew Nurnberg. What's the significance of Andrew Nurnberg? He was a student of Van Dorn at Columbia University who was friends with Michael Brown, and it's just this big full circle of people knowing people knowing people. And the Van Dorns have been comments in almost every single one of our sessions that we've talked about writers. Anyway, so on February 3rd, 2015, it's announced that HarperCollins, remember HarperCollins is now the new publishing house that was formerly known as Lippincott, would publish Go Set a Watchman, which includes variations of many of the characters in To Kill a Mockingbird. Remember what I said about To Kill a Mockingbird? Mm-hmm. What was the origin?
This first one was the first draft.
Right, the first draft, and it was four or five pages that came out of that. Okay, so according to HarperCollins press release, it was originally thought that the Watchmen manuscript was lost. According to Nurnberg, Mockingbird was originally intended to be the first book of a trilogy. They discussed the publishing of Mockingbird first, Watchmen last, and a shorter connecting novel in between. Now, Jonathan Mahler's account, now as you know, New York Times writer, of how Watchmen was only ever really considered to be the first draft of Mockingbird, and makes this assertion seemingly unlikely. But the thing is the evidence proved the point that it was a portion of 4 pages within the original manuscript. So, anyways, the book was extraordinarily controversial, published in July of 2015, and they sold it as a sequel to Kill a Mockingbird, and thought it had been confirmed to be the first draft of the latter, which narrative, I mean, it was just kind of repackaged, but it was a complete yet separate work, but they used similar characters, and they're trying to explain all of this to us. So anyways, the book is set some 20 years after the period of time depicted in Mockingbird, when Scout returns as an adult to New York to visit her father in Macomb, Alabama. Now, it alludes to Scott's view of her father, Atticus Finch, as a moral compass, or the watchman, forced to grapple with the issues both personal and political as she tried to understand her father's attitude towards society and her own feelings about the place where she was born and spent her childhood. Okay, so the publication of the novel, which was announced by her lawyer, raised concerns over why Lee, who was for 55 years, had maintained that she would never write another book, and would suddenly, all of a sudden, choose to publish this book. And some people have published this book again. So in February of 2015, the state of Alabama thought through its Human Rights Resource Department, launched an investigation into whether Lee was competent enough to consent to the publishing of Go Set a Watchman. The investigation found that the claims of coercion and elderly abuse were unfounded. Now, of course, this is only according to Lee's lawyer, who did what? Published the book.
Made a lot of money.
Okay. So, Lee, through Lee's attorney, there was several quotes, and this is all from the New York Times interview of her attorney with the publication. Again, we don't know. So, this characterization, however, was contested by many of Lee's friends. The Hills, the Browns, her nephews, the Connor boys, Carol Channing's daughter, who she was very close with, and of course Stephen. So what happened? So New York Times columnist Joe Nocera continued arguing that there's something fishy going on here. So he took issue with how the book was promoted, okay, how it was newly discovered, and attested that other people within Lee's attorney office were a little shady. So there was investigations and all this kind of stuff. Now, interestingly enough, everybody familiar with Rupert Murdoch? Who is he?
Pyramid guy.
Rupert Murdoch?
Oh,
Tabloid,
yeah.
He's owner of Fox, one of the largest media moguls in the world. Okay, he owns Fox Media, which is 20th Century Fox, and so on and so forth. Well, who did Lee's attorney sell it to? The Murdoch Empire. So are you really thinking, after what Martha had said, that this woman, Harper Lee, would be happy as hell? I don't know. I'm just throwing questions out.
That happened the year after her sister Alice died.
Bingo.
Was always the one that
They were always together. They were both spinsters, by the way. So, just throw a couple more things in here to confuse everybody. Stephen Peck, son of Gregory and Veronica Peck, expressed concerns as well. And as he stated to Charlie Rose, he would be willing to fund any and all of the investigation to find out what really happened. I'm going to put all of my cash and all of my daddy's fortune on figuring out, as he quoted, what the hell. Now, I also want to mention that that great interviewer Charlie Rose was also friendly with her as well, but never was able to sit down and have a conversation with her publicly. So I mean, who the hell wouldn't want to sit down with Charlie Rose and have a conversation? Huh? A little scary, but hell with it. Yeah, you would. So anyways, so much complication, so much concern. So anyways, let me get back to Lee's former agent, who was subsequently fired by the attorney. And what they did is that to prove that it was hers and that she wrote it, they brought it to a Sotheby's expert. Anyone familiar with Sotheby's? Not only an auction empire, but some of the best forensic scientists in the world to figure out what is what. Authentication. Some of the best in the world. There are only two other places in the country, two other places in the world that can do that, and that's Skinner Auction House out of Boston, Massachusetts. Fantastic people. Anthropology has come a long way. So they bring it to Sotheby's and to find out, well, when the hell was this written? They can carbon date stuff now at this point in time. And so they said, this is it. Now, what was interesting is that Tay senior moment. Tay Torrey, who was her editor, made several comments that, yeah, this is stuff that I read. This is hers. I was there. We were there together. We worked on it for how many years? I know the material. But all that at that point in time was omitted. until very recently. So anyway, and again, that was the same thing that happened with Alice. Alice's statements were omitted. All right, so let's move on. Let's finally move on. Later, it was posted in the Wall Street Journal that he had said, which is her term. To me, it was an unedited draft. Do you want to put that early version out there, or do you want to put it in the University of Alabama archives for scholars to look at? And that was in pure reference to because it was marked up. Oh, and by the way, Sotheby's did correctly state that this stuff was real. It was not. It wasn't a copy or a photo or any of that. This was a real document at that period of time. Now, I'm not a scientist. I have no idea how they are able to do that, but they were able to do it. So anyways, Lee dies in her sleep on the morning of February 19th, 2016, at the age of 89 years of age. And she dies in her home, the home she was raised in, the home she was born in. And her funeral was held the very next day at the First United Methodist Church in Monroeville. And all of her friends, the Pecks and what was left of the Browns and the Williamses and the Van Dorns and Wayne Flint and a handful of other people showed up, and her nephews were there. And of course, it was only closed to the outside. It was only for close family members and really close friends. Now, I do want to give you a brief list that she did have a few articles that were published. There's just a handful between 1960, 61, and 1965. One of them was Love in Other Words, and that was published in Vogue. The other thing is, how did she get published in these magazines that were really well sought after at a period of time? Her friendship in the 1960s with Truman Capote was her entree. So Christmas to Me in McCall, and of course that was December of 1961. When Children Discover America, also in McCall, August of 65. Now, remember I told you in 1983 she goes to Alabama and she reads a couple of things, and she reads Romance and High Adventures. That's 1983. And that's published with a handful of... I'm sorry? Oh, okay. That was published with Clearings in a Thicket, 1985. And that's a collection of all of those, the 3 previous articles, plus some other little tiny short stories. And then last but not least, in 2006, I failed to mention, 2006, she was honored by Oprah Winfrey. And Oprah was just fascinated with her. Of course, Oprah never was able to interview her on television, that is. But Oprah Winfrey came away with glee and joy to meet a woman of her stature. And so O Magazine in 2006 published open letters to Oprah Winfrey, which were essentially these... that's the other thing I want to mention. None of her stuff are on computers. She used a typewriter. She used a pencil. And when she communicated with individuals, it was through the old way of snail mail, as well as a handful of phone calls. But these open letters were open letters back and forth from Oprah Winfrey to Harper Lee, which is fascinating in and of itself, that Oprah Winfrey would take the time to actually write a damn letter. So anyways, that's the end of this. Is there anyone interested in talking about her second book? Reading from the second book? Participating from the second book?
Have we all read Watchmen? You guys haven't? Okay. We were talking about it earlier. I don't really know where to go, but I marked out a few things in it, but it's really just, there again, the opening.
So Martha is going to come up and give just a brief hoop on her second book.
Tijan, this dream's where you belong. Your golden journey now has just begun with your mother's arms.